Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all again, and I'm looking forward to this panel that we're going to have, which is about the case study we did down in Ashland in Southern Oregon. This case study is going to have 3 panelists that share their perspectives on working together to implement wildfire risk reduction strategies that are protecting the drinking water watershed for the city of Ashland. As I provide some quick introductory remarks, Chris, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen if you're ready for that. So we have 40 minutes for this panel. We will be going until 10:10 a.m. That means that each of our speakers just has 10 minutes. So we'll be moving along quickly through that. And then following our speakers, we're going to have hopefully 10 minutes for questions and answers. While our speakers are speaking, feel free to put questions for them in the chat box, but out of respect for them, please focus on the content of their presentations and this panel at that time. And again, we will try to make sure to get to all of those questions and comments at the end. After this, we will have a 10-minute break. So from 10:10 to 10:20, we will be having a 10-minute screen break. All right, Chris, that looks great. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, who's Chris Chambers. Chris is the Forest Division Chief for the City of Ashland and Ashland Fire and Rescue. And he's actually a native of the community of Ashland and a graduate of OSU as well, and has really extensive experience working on community wildfire protection projects in the Ashland area. Chris, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
Is that working for everybody?
Perfect.
Okay,
that's good. We can hear it.
When you go into this speaker view, it's hard to find your unmute. So I'm going to open up the discussion about Ashland Forest Resiliency Project, and then my colleagues are going to give you some more detail about how, as a partnership, we've been able to implement this cross-boundary all-land stewardship project over the past 10 years. So starting with a little bit of background first, just to set the stage for how the AFR project came to be and why, in part, why it's been successful. The history, and just at least the recent history with the city, the watershed, and the Forest Service stretches back to 1891, when the city government petitioned the President of the United States, Grover Cleveland at the time, to set aside the Ashland Forest Reserve to protect the public land, or to create public land to protect the water supply, again focusing back to that water supply issue, from the quote in the actual text is timberland speculators and other types of vandals. So the proclamation for the creation of the Forest Reserve came in September of 1893 with the purpose of protecting the municipal watershed. So started really early, before the Forest Service was even the Forest Service. And that continued into 1929 through a cooperative agreement, as the city's reservoir, Rita Reservoir, was filled behind Hostler Dam. As it was constructed and finished off, the city pushed to create a cooperative agreement with the Forest Service. You can see there's a copy of it, right? Let's see. I'm getting my slides. There we go. The cooperative agreement signed between the mayor of the city and at the time, an acting secretary of agriculture, primarily outlining cooperative protection of the city's water supply. This cooperative agreement is something we still talk about it. Donna Mickley, our district ranger, is going to mention it. Really a foundational document that established this co-management that continues far into the future. And along this time in history, there are fires burning, nothing like we're seeing today, but a notable one, the 1959 Ashland Watershed Fire, was actually called the Watershed Fire, though it didn't burn much of the Ashland watershed. Still an important point that galvanized citizens and the Forest Service together in thinking about how to manage the fire risk in the watershed. And subsequent to this, a road system was built in the watershed, in part to address fire concerns and allow future access to logging, probably not called fuels reduction at the time. Primarily some logging happened to a small degree after that fire. As we think about managing watersheds, we often talk about how expensive the work is going to be and in fuels reduction in general. It's seen a little bit as a money sink, and we don't often get enough airtime to talk about the value of the resources that we're protecting. So in Ashland, the value each year that citizens are paying in their water bills is $8.5 million. So over just the period of the 10 years that we've been working on this project, citizens have paid nearly $80 million worth of water value. And we start throwing around numbers in funding and grants that we've secured to make this work happen is upwards of $25 million. But when you start to add, which seems like a lot, but when you start to add up the value that we're protecting that's accumulating annually, that investment starts to look kind of small. And that's just the water value. There's many other values in the watershed. Trail use, recreation is a huge deal in Ashland. It brings a lot of visitors to town for mountain bike events and running. And then at the top of the watershed is the Mount Ashland ski area that has 75,000 visitors a year. I didn't even touch property value bordering the watershed. So, that can quickly get into hundreds of millions of dollars in values protected. The city itself actually contributes to this project on the economic side. There's a fee that is paid on a utility bill. It's actually gone up to $3, not $1.39, just as of this last year. So that is part of the economic payback that the city is contributing just on a citizen by citizen, household by household basis towards the completion of this project. The genesis of AFR came on the heels of a lot of controversy during the timber war years. There was work ongoing in the Forest Service ownership in the watershed, which is 95% of the area in the Ashland watershed. And the citizens weren't happy with what was happening. And Donna's going to touch a little bit on the genesis piece too, but the city actually rallied together and put a plan forth under this community alternative and sent that over to the Forest Service. This is the what we call the sweaty little room where everybody was gathered to hammer this out. You can't have smoky little rooms anymore, I guess. We graduated to sweaty. So this was the technical team that developed this alternative, which in large part became the 7,600 acre footprint of the AFR project that we are actually just wrapped up the last cutting on that in the past couple of months. So we're happy to say that we're gotten to the end of the cutting part of the footprint. Still a lot of burning out there, but pretty cool to be at this point. I'm going to hand it over to Donna Mickley, District Ranger from the Siskiyou Mountains Ranger District on the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, to talk a little bit more about the Stewardship Project. Well, Mike, if you want me to cover for Donna, I could.
Right. Why don't you start that, Chris? And in the meantime, maybe Donna can go down to the audio thing and call in on the phone. And that way, when she connects, we can have her. But why don't you go ahead and we're a little ahead of schedule, so it's probably a good time to be having technical difficulties.
Donna notes that it says that the host will unmute her, so I don't know who the host is, but maybe that person can check what's going on.
I am the host, and according to my data here, she is unmuted.
Okay. Donna, you may want to check your speaker volume or your microphone volume. Okay.
I think she's going to do the call in, which is probably the best bet at this point. So I'll start in on just at least the first couple slides, maybe, while Donna gets patched in. I did mention the 1929 cooperative agreement to protect the water supply. And then another key piece of legislation from 2004, maybe started in 2003, was Healthy Forest Restoration Act. And that's what allowed the city to get together and propose an alternative into the NEPA process as this community generated alternative to be analyzed and considered alongside a Forest Service alternative and a no action alternative. So a little different NEPA process, a little more streamlined, but allowed a lot of community participation in the creation of the AFR, what would become the AFR project. There's a lot of values in the Ashland watershed, outside of those that I mentioned on the economic side and the obvious water quality one, but a lot of homes in and next to the Ashland watershed. The majority of the community of Ashland is influenced by fire and water, of course, in the Ashland watershed. We sit right at the base of the Siskiyou Mountains, nestled into the watershed. There's some significant forest health, insect, and disease issues happening in this dry forest ecosystem. It's one that's highly departed from the background fire return interval, which some great research done by the Nature Conservancy, another one of our partners in this project, has showed that the fire return interval was somewhere on the order of from every couple of years in places to up to 25 to 30 years, with an average of about 9 to 10 years across the project area. Obviously, water quality, incredibly important to the city. And then threatened endangered species, we have the northern spotted owl and late successional habitat, and also got thrown into the mix during the project is managing for Pacific fisher habitat. So there's the whole area that we work in is a late successional reserve, or LSR, under the Forest Service's land management allocations. It's critical habitat for the spotted owl. There's a research natural area also, and a McDonald Peak inventoried roadless area. So we have quite the nexus of difficult management situations moving into AFR that needed to be navigated. One of the things that really helped us to get buy-in from the community, in addition to involving the community in the creation of the original plan, but was to have an external review team that would check in with the partnership as we developed the plans for AFR, and then as it was hitting the ground and implementation was starting and layout. These were representatives from the Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative, OSU Extension, Max Bennett, and then a local environmental group, Klamath-Siskiyou Wildland Center, or KS Wild. So having this check on it was one way to show transparency and to get some really good feedback from people who have technical expertise and knowledge, and something that was really important to getting AFR accepted and supported in the community. I don't hear Donna yet. I see her talking on the phone, but don't hear a voice. Okay, we're going to keep going, Donna. Sorry. The community engagement piece of AFR, which is actually led by the city, is a really, really important. We talk a lot about social capital and developing and maintaining social capital to be able to do this kind of work. We've put together well over 50 public events and tours out in the watershed. I think the tours are an essential piece to it. Getting people on the ground really is a healthy dose of reality for people who might like to hang out on social media and throw darts at the project. But when you get them out on the ground, people often change their minds. We maintain a website, Facebook page, all the usual social media stuff, do a lot of work with the local media. And then we have a lot of interpretive signs out on the site at trailheads, and even a fire ecology interpretive trail that guides you through a whole bunch of stops along the way in the lower watershed, very accessible to the public. Multi-party monitoring is another incredibly important piece of AFR. Not only answering the questions, did we do what we said we were going to do in implementation monitoring, but also to evaluate the effectiveness of our treatments and to say with certainty to the public, at least as certain as you can be with the data you collect, that we're not having unintended impacts to resources like the water quality of the creeks going into the city's water supply, the soils that we are supposed to be protecting in this project, late successional wildlife habitat. Retention of large trees is a really important piece of this to the public, to know that when we're out there cutting, we're not cutting large trees to make money for the project, that we're actually retaining those trees, and then monitoring the health and long-term survival of the trees is really important. And as I mentioned earlier, Nature Conservancy brought a fire history study, found funding, and that's actually a published paper now about the fire history of the Ashland watershed. And all of this is driven by community stakeholders who came up with the multi-party monitoring plan. The way we divvied up the responsibilities for this and working in a 4-partner team, the Forest Service maintained their oversight of the project, their legal responsibility to make sure that contracts and rules are followed. The city contributed a lot of technical expertise. We are an adjacent landowner in the watershed of about 1,100 acres. The city has a history of managing our own lands, including helicopter logging, prescribed burning. So we brought that to the table, along with the community engagement lead that I mentioned. Lomacazzi, and Marco is going to be talking in a minute, started as the fiscal sponsor, taking contract money, implementing it, and really managing the workforce, which is an absolutely probably the most important part of this project. Planning is great, but it's just a book that sits on a shelf if nothing happens on the ground. And that translation from planning to implementation through their workforce has been, and you will hear about it from Marco, it's been probably the most important part of a successful project. And the Nature Conservancy is running point on multi-party monitoring and delivery of science in the project. So here's a couple of pictures of just what the conditions are like. You get an idea of how close the AFR project is and really integrated into the community. And some of the conditions up in the upper watershed, where we have severely overgrown stands, incredible amount of ladder fuel and surface fuel that we were faced with. And then also protecting these legacy trees, trying to keep them on the landscape for at least a couple of hundred more years if possible. The stewardship agreement, Marco, tell me when your piece is, because I'm not sure when your transition.
Ready to go, Chris.
You ready to go? All right.
Okay, thank you.
Take it away. Sorry.
No problem. Great job. Yeah, so as Chris mentioned, there was a lot of controversy on this project, and my personal involvement dates back to the early 90s when there was a timber sale proposed by the Forest Service called HAZRED, and it was met by protests and a lot of controversy because we didn't have a mechanism to accomplish the resiliency work and the fuels mitigation work that had an ecological approach. We were still trying to pay for work through the harvesting of large trees. So with the Stewardship Authority in 1999, the pilot granted, and then 2003, 10-year authority to try this authority of stewardship agreements, and then permanent authority in 2014. This enabled communities to work collaboratively with the Forest Service, not just on developing NEPA and scoping and a scope of work and a project, but also collaborative implementation. So in order to scale to meet the needs of this project and to build workforce capacity, technical capacity, partner co-investment, stewardship agreements enable us that incremental capacity development. We enter into these agreements as partners. Non-federal partners contribute 20% matching dollars, non-federal matching dollars, and bring a suite of skills, as Chris shared on that quad pie chart. So these are just some of the photos of implementation, working with contractors, implementers. You could shift to the next one, Chris. So as we incrementally develop capacity to accomplish these treatments on the ground, we employed 17 full-time equivalent, over 200 personnel, mobilized contractors in the community, both timber, service providers, technical, and then our team tried to attract the investment needed to get this work done, because this is an upside down, if you want to speak in technical jargon, upside down timber sale that wouldn't pay its way out of the woods. We're limited by 20%. Operating anything above 20% slopes has to be aerial lifted with helicopters, very expensive logging, not great access, steep slopes. So trying to build that capacity through workforce, programmatic and technical. capacity as well, in addition to the on the ground, the boots on the ground. Go ahead, Chris. So really a different way of doing business. Collaboratively, the partners are writing prescriptions, laying out units, assisting in the marketing and measurement with the Forest Service, co-invested, giving input to how treatments are conducted on the ground, obviously with the NEPA as the big backdrop. But our teams on the ground are doing the marking. The implementers are marking the trees, are writing the prescriptions. So a partner operational approach that's collaborative. Next. So the green area is the watershed, and the yellow is the 7,600 acres analyzed under the community alternative, the record of decision for AFR. We were able to expand that to an all lands initiative. You could see the purple, and then the red is the strategic ridges that we focused on. Next, Chris. So we expanded that to a 58,000 acre area with the goal of treating 14,500 acres. So that would be 28% of the landscape. So if you look at that private land, so these are private non-industrial lands, that's the moat around the castle of the forest, of the municipal watershed. And a lot of the same conditions of the slides that Chris shared across private non-industrial and the public lands. So we were able to expand this effort with expanding our partnership. Next. And bring in additional partners and additional co-investment. In 2015, we were awarded a Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership pot of funding to bring our project across all lands, and then additionally attracting Oregon Watershed Enhancement Boards, Focus Investment Partnership dollars, state agencies like ODF, local soil and water conservation districts, and Fish and Wildlife Services Partner for Fish and Wildlife Program, NFF. So kind of ramping up our economic support and our technical support as we expanded across all lands. Next. And then a big emphasis to protecting, the water supply from high severity fire, community, the values at risk. Being that it is a late successional reserve, there's a lot of large old trees in the watershed, a lot of trees with fire scars on them with that work that TNC did. So we mapped out all the large trees. This is really important for community buy-in and support and public social license and trust, and really focused on protecting those large old trees through our implementation efforts and monitoring where those treatments were conducted to bring folks out there, show them what we were doing, inventorying the vegetation we were cutting and the trees we were cutting, and really knowing where exactly each spot was that we can bring any community members and projects in question. You can see the large hardwood there to the left as well. So large Pacific madrones and black oaks, in addition to large ponderosa pine and Douglas fir throughout the watershed. And this is being monitored. So legacy tree protection is very important. When we start implementing, we want to ensure that our burning operations and our commercial removal is going to protect these trees. You could see some raking being accomplished on the upper right. And during burning, we have a legacy strike team on the ground with our burn crews. We burned close to 1,000 acres of ham piles this season. So trying to protect those trees during burn operations from heat and convection as well. Next. So to date, we've accomplished 13,000 acres of density management and surface and lattice treatments. Prescribed fire, that's continues to be a challenge with smoke management, but we're slowly setting the stage to get more good fire on the ground. Next. And then you implemented 2,300 acres of helicopter thinning, aerial lift, and some ground-based operations. So really 3 timber sales, ecologically based thinning operations that generated 14 million board feet as the restoration byproducts of the project. Next. Then those receipts, next, Chris, that were generated, $6 million, are then reinvested back into additional service work. So this is one of our landings in a really high recreation area with a lot of community support. The average diameter, 14 inches DBH, but we did not have a diameter limit and a lot of community trust in the project. Next slide. So one more quick pitch here is investing in the workforce, health benefits, retirement, changing the paradigm on how we treat workers. And AFR helped us build a model that's really nationally recognized. and honoring the people that do the work. They're out there today doing this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marco. So that was Marco Bay. He's the executive director and founder of the Lomacotsi Restoration Project, which is a nonprofit organization that's been one of the key partners in all of this work. I'd like to stop and check if Donna, you're here.
Looks the same.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we have time for some questions, and I'm going to begin by going through some of the questions that were in the chat, and then if folks have others, they can feel free to bring those up as well. I'll ask Chris and Marco to stay on video if they're able. So I'm going to head back up to an earlier question. Can you clarify the Ashland Forest Resiliency rate that's charged to Ashland citizens? Is it per household per month?
Yeah, per household per month. It's actually based on the size of the water meter. So just about all residents have a 3/4 inch water meter, I believe. Then businesses and larger water users, the university, school district, large businesses, companies have larger water meters and pay more, but the average residential rate right now is set at $3 per household per month.
Great, thank you, Chris. Then we had a question about monitoring. I know that's been a big part of the AFR project. What is the current plan for monitoring the impact of the 7,600 acres? Who is directly involved with that process, both with monitoring tree release, downed litter, and water quality downstream?
I can only can talk through the phone, but I can hear you, and I guess I can communicate. So I'll answer that, yeah, we do have some extensive monitoring that's happening. And what this partnership and collaboration has done is really given us capacity. So the Nature Conservancy is the one that's really spearheaded our monitoring for us. And it's much more extensive than we would normally have on a project. And it really feeds our ability to do adaptive management, to be able to determine, are we getting the effects we intended? And if not, make those modifications.
I was going to add to that. We got a nice shot in the arm. The $6 million of the completion funding for AFR came from Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, or OWEB, through their FIP projects. And they actually gave AFR, through the Nature Conservancy, a supplemental monitoring award to further the monitoring effort and keep collecting the good data that we have started to collect, and to show the efficacy of the project, starting at the stand level and then looking at the landscape as well.
Great, thank you, Chris.
One
Before
thing
I go
I'd
to
add,
other questions, oh, go ahead, Marco, go ahead.
really quick to that, Emily Jane, is when crews are on the ground doing the inventory, the common stand exams, there's a A to Z connection from the partners collecting the data to the handoff to the Forest Service and TNC. So it's seamless through the model that we're operating under, a different collaborative implementation model that provides really accurate information from the stand exams to the prescription development to the monitoring protocols related to tree release and that question.
Great, thank you. I wanted to give Donna a chance to, if you have anything you'd like to add. Donna, Chris covered your slides, but we're talking about a drinking water management context where the Forest Service is the landowner. And so Forest Service management policies, rules, and regulations affect all of that. I don't know if you want to add anything about being the public land manager of this drinking water supply watershed, or anything about the stewardship agreement mechanism, just anything you would have liked to add that you didn't get a chance to.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I just would really emphasize that we did have a history of an adversarial relationship between the Forest Service and the community. And this partnership and these partners, they gave us social credibility. Not only did they increase capacity and increase funding, but it really helped us regain trust with the community, that we were listening to them. We adopted their community alternative. The city of Ashland actually led the community involvement. I did not wear my uniform when I went to a meeting. The Forest Service very much stood back and let the partners lead this process. And that was really unique and really why I think it was so successful. And just the other thing that I want to add is we focused on ecologically, what did this landscape need to be resilient? And when we did that plan, we estimated it would cost us $12 million to treat the first 7,600 acres. And that's a really astronomical number. And we had no idea where that funding was coming from. We were driven by ecologically, what does this forest need? And by planning in that fashion and doing that analysis and signing that decision, we found ample opportunities to find the funding and do this really important work. So just want to make that point.
Great. Thank you so much for adding that. We have another question in the chat box. It's to Marco, but I think all of you could speak to it too. What are your thoughts on stewardship collaboratives that aim to convert small woody debris into biochar and reintroduce low intensity fire back onto the landscape for fire resiliency?
I could start on, this is a really expensive piece of ground to work on and really difficult due to the steep slopes and long distances from roads. We did do some biochar example projects with some of our partners, but it's a hard one to implement on this project because of the cost. And then related to the getting fire on the ground, I'll turn that over to my friends and colleagues here. And anything you want to add on biochar?
I'll focus on smoke because I think that's the nexus between those two things. Smoke management has been really challenging. Any burning up on the hill, the smoke tends to funnel towards town, especially in the evening. We've actually engaged a lot on the policy front in smoke management through ODF and Department of Environmental Quality to create burn rules that would actually allow us to get this work done. We still don't get as much burning done every year as we need to because of being hampered by smoke management and concerns about community health. I don't know on the biochar front much about the smoke, but at the scale and the volume of biomass that we're moving out of the forest, I don't think there's really any feasible way that biochar would be able to keep up with that amount of biomass. And that from what I know of biochar, you're doing a lot in the smoldering combustion phase, which creates the most toxic and the worst smoke for community health. So at least in our position and the topography of Ashland in this valley, it wouldn't be a very good alternative. That might work in some other places out there in the landscape, but it's overly challenging on this project.
Great. One of your local colleagues has a question. What are the plans for long-term fire risk reduction of the watershed? And I assume he might also be referring to maintenance as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really the intent is to get this landscape to a place where fire is what we use, prescribed fire is what we use. Ideally, we get to a place where at the right time and season, a natural wildfire, we have enough defensible zones. It's safe enough for firefighters that we could actually let some of that do its job. But really the goal is to get this to a place where maintenance is done with fire. You want to add to that, Chris?
And
or Marco?
Say that the intent of the city funding via the water bills is a funding source for that maintenance in perpetuity. That wasn't just something we did over 10 years to get the initial work done. That's something that's going to be ongoing in order to maintain the landscape.
And the only quick addition to that is through the stewardship agreement, it did get extended for 5 years, but just thinking into the future, this relationship of partner investment, I think the team is committed to the maintenance of this watershed and also bringing in additional partners, additional investment in perpetuity, because this landscape will continue to need fire and continue to need maintenance to protect that investment we've put in.
Great, thank you all. We also have a few questions about smoke, which has obviously been a huge issue in Southern Oregon in several recent years. So regarding the smoke issue, that is largely a social issue. Have you noticed tangible traction in community acceptability of smoke outside of wildfire season? And do you have any specific talking points that you use to gain traction in increasing that public acceptance during burning season?
I'll jump in on that because the city has done a lot of work on that front. We actually created a whole program to address smoke called SmokeWise Ashland. It's got its own identity. It's supported by the business community, healthcare community, the university, and other partners, in part because of summertime wildfire smoke, but it actually started as an outgrowth of AFR to give people the health and air quality tools in one place so they could go there, understand what they need to do to protect themselves, who's vulnerable, and the need for prescribed burning. And that's been a big push for the last 3 years for us as we're getting more and more into this burn maintenance mode of needing to put fire on the ground and fire right in and next to the community. You know, we're trying to get into burning city park land and the city's watershed land. We've been burning since 2012, which is directly adjacent to the community. And then the Forest Service shares a boundary with the city of Ashland, and we've got burning on both sides of that line. And so some of our burns we know are going to put smoke right into town. And as far as talking points with the community, we lean a lot on the good fire, putting good fire back onto the landscape. We bring in the tribal piece of burning on this landscape that happened for thousands and thousands of years as one of the primary means of the forest evolving with fire, as well as humans evolving with fire and the forest on this landscape here in Ashland. And that the protection part of it is really important. There's a lot of science out there on the efficacy of controlled burning to reduce fire intensity and to protect communities and resources from intense fire. So we lean on all of those things, and we try to do as much public interaction around that as we can, and media too.
One quick point to add to that is, the interaction between the public and the operations is very close. This is a real quintessential WUI community, a lot of recreation. There's burning going on, and there's hikers, folks walking their dogs and riding their bikes. So really equipping our practitioners on the ground with the right talking points, understanding how to communicate to the public. A lot of the interaction happens from the forest workers and the burn implementers as well. So having everyone on the same page of the message, the intent, is also part of the grassroots engagement piece.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any last questions. Donna, Chris, or Marco, any last words you'd like to add before we close out the panel on any topic? Okay, great. There's been a lot of good information put out about Ashland if you want to learn more about what they've been doing there. Their recent story map does a really good job of representing this landscape and what they've done there. And there's quite a lot to look at online, and they've done a really good job with that. So I encourage you all to follow up and look at that. Maybe one of you could pop the link to the story map again into the chat box if you have time. So what we're doing now is we're heading to a 10-minute screen break. Returning at 10:20 for the water quantity panel, or some great talks are lined up. So feel free to take a break, take a snack, and come back at 10:20. Thank you.